This is a demonstration to show you how to make Chelsea buns. I'm starting off with 500 grams of flour, strong plain flour. Strong plain flour has a higher gluten content, which will help your bread to develop a nice stretchy elastic structure. So I'm going to sieve the flour into a bowl and add a pinch of salt to that. Not too much, because salt will affect the gluten's ability to develop. But sieve the flour into your mixing bowl. It's a lot of flour. If you didn't have strong plain flour, you could actually get away with using plain flour. But plain flour has slightly less gluten content than the strong plain flour. So you just sieve that into the bowl. You will also need for your dough 1 teaspoon, so it's 1 teaspoon of salt. I don't tend to put 1 teaspoon of salt in, I put a tiny pinch in comparison. Okay, and 1 7-gram sachet of yeast, and that's fast acting yeast, and 300 millilitres of milk, semi-skimmed or skimmed if you want to lower the fat content of your recipe. Whole milk will tend to make your recipe far higher in fat content. Okay, so, and 1 egg. So we've got 1 egg, 1 packet of Easy Blend fast acting yeast, 1 sachet, a pinch of salt, and 300 millilitres of milk. I've also got 40 grams of butter, unsalted butter, which I've melted, and I'm going to add the milk to that, which was slightly warmed. We warm it on a low heat just to get it onto, so that's of blood temperature on a low heat. You put your finger in, clean finger, to test it. It's just lukewarm, okay? So it's blood heat, so that it's not going to kill the yeast. So once the flour is sieved, you add to that your pinch of salt. You also then add the yeast, which looks like this when it comes out of the packet. So it's an Easy Blend fast acting yeast. If you are buying a drum of yeast, if it's the Allinson brand, it's the green drum, not the yellow drum that you need, okay? But these sachets are brilliant. You also stir it. So, just stir that in. And add the crushed vitamin C tablet. So I've taken 1 vitamin C tablet from this and crushed it to a fine powder to add that then to the mixture as well. Okay, and stir that in. Now, you don't have to put vitamin C tablet in. However, in school, or if you're trying to make bread very quickly and you don't have several hours to make it, vitamin C tablet does actually help to speed up the process of bread making. So it cuts out one of the long stages of proving, of rising, to allow the dough to stretch and allow the yeast to produce carbon dioxide gas. So it just speeds up the production of carbon dioxide gas. So vitamin C tablet's gone in there. So just to recap, you've got 500 grams of plain flour, or preferably strong plain flour, sieved, a pinch of salt in there, 1 7-gram sachet of fast-acting yeast, and a crushed vitamin C tablet. To that, I'm going to make a well into the centre and add my liquid, which is the melted butter and milk, but just warmed slightly to blood heat. And that will then go into the middle, but you don't add it all at once. Okay. And at the same time, I'm going to add the egg. So, beat the egg. And adding egg makes it a rich, because it's a very rich, it's an enriched dough. So you've actually got fruit, it's very sweet, etc. You add the egg, the beaten egg, and then use your spoon to mix that. Okay. Now I tend to add the liquid cautiously, so add it gradually, so until it starts to form a dough. You can then keep topping it up and mixing to bring it together until it forms a dough. Now the liquid in any recipe is a guide, so it doesn't always necessarily mean you have to add it all. But this is quite a cold, dry sort of atmosphere today, so it may well absorb more liquid because the absorbency of flour is very much linked to the atmospheric pressure, whether it's a dry day, wet, very humid day, and so on. Just keep adding it, keep mixing. Okay, now as soon as you add the moisture to this, it will activate the yeast. So yeast is a biological raising agent. It needs certain conditions to really activate it so that it will produce carbon dioxide gas at an optimum rate. And those conditions are that it needs food, so that's provided by the sugar units within the starch, and it needs moisture, which we've now added, and it will also need temperature, which is provided by the warm butter and milk. Now when it gets to this sort of stage, you should be able to put your hands in and start really mixing it. So just make sure you've got every last bit of egg in there and every last little bit of milk. Okay. Stack your washing up tidily by your sink out of the way. And then you can put your hands in, having made sure that you started off with nice clean hands. And get your hands in there and start pulling it together. Okay, so just to recap, the conditions required for yeast to grow, to bud and produce carbon dioxide gas through fermentation is to add food, so that's the sugar units within your starch, your flour. You have moisture, so that's your warm milk and butter, and warmth. So nice warm conditions, not too hot. If you overheat your milk and your butter, it will actually kill off the yeast if the temperature is too high. Okay, so once we've got to this stage, okay, you then lightly then roll and knead your dough on a floured work surface. So a little bit of flour on there, not too much. Again, move all your washing up to your sink and stack it out of the way. And then you're actually using your knuckles to knead the dough. Okay, so it's the harder you treat your bread, the better the stretchiness will be. So you've got to do 5 minutes of kneading. At this point, it's because we've put vitamin C in and we're trying to speed up the process, we then knead the dough for 5 minutes solidly. So you have to watch your time with this. So imagine a square, pull the corners of the square to the middle and just keep rotating, okay? Don't over flour your worktop because it will, the dough will absorb the flour and then it will become very tough. So you can use the palm of your hand as well to knead the dough, and you should find that as you're kneading, the dough will then start to clear, the worktop won't need any flour after a while. Okay, I'm near the end of my 5 minutes kneading. Now what you do is you want a nice stretchy, you can see that it's a stretchy elastic dough, soft, not too solid and firm, it's soft and stretchy. You can see that stretchy network there where the gas is producing bubbles and the gluten is forming strands around those so that the mixture will rise nicely. Okay. At this point now we need to put it to prove. So it needs to relax and allow the gluten strands to actually stretch and around those carbon dioxide bubbles that are being produced by the yeast as it ferments. One thing I forgot to say earlier is as soon as moisture is added to your mixture, when you mix it, you need to mix it really thoroughly to form a dough. But at that point then you've got two proteins in the flour, glutenin and gliadin, and glutenin and gliadin when moisture is added join to form gluten, which is the protein in the flour that's going to allow this dough to develop its nice stretchy network so that it can stretch a nice framework around the carbon dioxide bubbles. Okay, so we now put this into a greased bowl, so it's lightly greased with oil. Okay, pop that in there and you just cover it to produce a greenhouse effect. So a little bit of cling film across the top, but you're not pinning your bread down. What you're doing is just lightly covering it to provide a nice warm environment. Okay, so it's loosely covered to provide a sort of greenhouse effect, and then you just put that to one side in a warm place, but not the oven, not in the oven. So a warm place for 20 minutes. Okay, so I'm going to put this to rise for 20 minutes to one side, and I'll be back in a moment. Okay, I'm back again. So the dough is rising and I'm just sorting out the filling. So what we've got is 25 grams of unsalted butter, which I am melting at the moment. So that is melting on hob, nice on a low heat, because you don't want it too hot because you just want it melted. So if it's too hot, it's actually going to make the dough melt as it comes in contact with it. You also need 1 orange zest. Now I like to use a zester, which is a nice cutting edge on here, and you pull that across your orange, which has been washed, and get the zest off. Okay, you can use that part of the grater, but that part of the grater, I find you end up with a lot of it stuck inside it, and you lose a lot of your zest. Okay, but you can use that if you have nothing, if you don't have a zester. Okay, so we're just peeling the zest off, so that's just the orange skin, so it's not going down into the white pith, it's just the outer orange surface. Okay, and we need the zest of a whole orange, but some of that's going to go into the filling and some of it's going to go into the glaze. Okay, so we just peel that off. You also have in your filling 75 grams of soft brown sugar. You have 2 teaspoons of ground cinnamon, so that's that. You have 100 grams of dried cranberries, 100 grams of sultanas. I've brought mixed fruit, but sultanas would be fine, and 100 grams of dried apricots. So that's your filling. Okay, so you just get everything weighed and prepared whilst your dough is rising, and use your time wisely to dovetail this sort of thing while the dough is rising. Dovetailing tasks, as if you're doing an exam, that's what the exam board would expect you to do, is to do other things and keep busy. Okay, so the dough has now risen, If you're short on time, you can rise it at this stage for 10 minutes rather than the 20. Okay, and then we'll rise it again later. So we take the dough out, dust it with flour, just to stop the oil from the bowl sticking it to the tabletop. I have my filling ready, so I've mixed my fruit. You could use just one type of fruit, so just all apricots, or just cranberries, or just currants and sultanas. However, I've mixed all three together and put some peel in as well. And at Christmas time, to have cranberries in there is actually really nice because it gives that sort of festive feel to it. I have the cinnamon and the sugar. The peel has been taken off the orange using a zester, and the sugar. So that's my filling, and melted butter. So we have, it's 25 grams of unsalted butter, melted in a saucepan, and that's ready to use. So what we now do is roll this out so that you have a rectangle, so shape it. You can see the dough is nicely risen. If we were to pull that apart, you can sort of see the structure there, okay? So I'm rolling that out, shaping it into a rectangular shape, and I want to then roll it. So you roll from the middle out and down, then turn it, keep it trying to get into a rectangular shape, into the middle, roll up, roll down, push that together so that you can do it again. And what you're trying to achieve is a nice rectangular shape that's 20 centimetres by 30, okay? And I've got a piece of paper there folded so that you can see. I may do it, this dough is well risen, so I might do it a little bit bigger than that at the moment. Now you do have another rising stage once you've got the filling in, so I would say 10 minutes before doing this stage is enough to rise, and then you can actually then come back and let it rise a little bit more once you've got your filling in, okay? So we're rolling that. Always start in the middle and pull towards you and push away, okay? That means that you don't have it uneven when you're rolling, so it should be fairly even in thickness by doing it that way. Lift it, move it, drag a little tiny bit of flour. I've got barely any flour on the worktop, but if you needed some, you could just add some, okay? Getting it as rectangular as you can. We want it that sort of size. Okay, so we're nearly there. Might do a little bit wider. As I say, the dough's really risen well. Okay. So that should be fine. Okay, doesn't matter if it's a little bit bigger. If your dough will stretch that far, you could make it a little bit bigger. Okay, so that's our rectangle. Okay, so we're pretty much there. We've done it slightly bigger one way than the other. Okay, that's better. Right, so that's ready to use. So now what we do is to brush the butter on. So we brush the butter over the top. This will help everything to stick. Okay. So we're brushing the butter over. Then you sprinkle your sugar. That's fine. That should help everything to stick nicely. You don't really want it dripping, so if you've got a little bit of butter left over, it doesn't matter. Okay. Then we're going to sprinkle the orange zest over that. I'm going to keep some of this because it says the zest of one orange, but I want to keep some for the topping as well. So I'm going to sprinkle my zest over. Okay. Sort of sticks to your fingers when you're doing this. And keep a little bit reserved for the top. Okay. Just spread that out a bit. There we go. Then we sprinkle on the sugar and cinnamon. So it's brush with melted butter, evenly sprinkle the orange zest over the buttered surface, followed by the sugar, cinnamon and dried fruit. So the sugar, sprinkle that over as well. Now, if you didn't have soft brown sugar, you could use golden caster sugar. That would be fine. You could, if you were really stuck, use caster sugar. Okay, so any sugar is going to be better than no sugar at all. So you can sort of modify these things. You could use wholemeal flour in the dough, the bread dough, if you wanted to. Okay, so I'm not going right to the edge on the side here. Trying to get fairly close to the edge, because obviously the edge bits will have no filling in otherwise. Okay, that's what I didn't want to happen, as it disappears off the edge. So just keep this edge down like so, and then you put your fruit on top. So just spread that out nice and evenly as best you can. It's easier, I find, to use my hands, but you could use a spoon to do this if you want to. You just got to make sure that your fingernails are clean when you're working and that your hands are clean, etc. So wash your hands in between stages to make sure that you're not transferring bacteria, and everything will be good. Okay, so we try and get that up to the edge as well, because otherwise if you get an end piece you have no filling. Bring that over like so. Don't be afraid to use your hands to actually get it out. Remembering, if you have cuts in your hand, you always wear a blue plaster to stop biological contamination from happening. Always check your fruit and everything, make sure it's all clean. And the cinnamon, you could put the cinnamon on. The recipe will say that to put the cinnamon on after the sugar. You can put it on after the fruit if you want to, it doesn't really matter, so long as it's on there. I think it would stick better if it goes on with the sugar, but you can. It's 2 teaspoons of cinnamon. Okay, so that's, and be careful that you don't sprinkle it, make it too airborne, because you'll start to inhale it and it'll make you cough. Okay, so it's 2 teaspoons of cinnamon. If you don't like cinnamon that much, you could put a little bit less in. Okay, but it's cinnamon that gives that sort of Christmassy, festive sort of feel to it. Okay, because it's that sort of one of those spices that you associate with Christmas scent. Okay, but your fruit could go on top of that instead, the other way around. Okay, so now what we do is we tack. All right, so that means just press the dough to the table on the nearest edge to you. Okay, let's get rid of our washing up and stand nicely by the sink, out of the way, keeping ourselves clutter free. Okay, and then you roll nice and tightly. Okay, so now what you're doing is rolling that just like a bit like a Swiss roll. Okay, but you're rolling towards you, and you want to try and get it as tight as you can. If you notice, I'm sort of pulling it round rather than rolling it, because if you roll it, you're going to roll the filling towards you and you'll lose a lot of it. So I'm sort of pulling it up and over. Okay. And then just use a little bit of that butter off that brush, just to brush that edge so it's going to stick when you get there. Okay. If you lose bits, you lose bits. Don't worry about it. Those to one side and clean them up later. So that's what we've got. Try and get your nice even shape, and if you notice the edge, what I'm doing is actually I'm going to pinch that closed. It has oil on it, melted butter, so I'm just going to pinch that to hold it. Okay, And then what I like to do is just roll it out a little bit to get the shape a bit better, so it's more even, because you might have it thicker in the middle. Okay, now that goes on a chopping board at this point, because if you cut directly onto your table with a sharp knife, you're going to cut into your tabletop, okay, and that will damage the work surface. So we'll just get rid of these bits out of the way, clear our table as we go. And now we're going to cut that up. Now, your recipe will tell you to cut, so it says with a sharp knife, cut into thick rounds, about 4 centimetres thick. Now, if I get a ruler, I'll show you. I'll just go and get a ruler. Okay, so we have a ruler, so that's 4 centimetres. So I've marked off 4 centimetres on that piece of paper, because unless you actually have a ruler that's kept for cooking, or you've cleaned it, sanitised it, you can't put it near your food. But what we have got now is a measure. You could cut yourself a paper template if you wanted to, and then use that to cut your, as a guide. So we want a nice even end, and we're cutting these into 4 centimetre rounds. Use a sawing action, because if you press down, what's going to happen is it will then squash it down. On your baking tray, use a little blob of oil or fat to hold your baking parchment down, just to stop it from coming off, slipping and sliding. Baking parchment will stop it from sticking. And what you then do is just cut your rounds and start to place them. You don't need to grease this because it's baking parchment, so you just place them on your tray. So cutting your 4 centimetre rounds. Okay, don't worry if you lose filling. If you lose filling, that's just what happens. Okay, try and turn it over without losing too much. You want to leave them about 1 centimetre apart on your tray, so that when they rise a little bit more, they can touch together. You can always scoop some of your filling up and press it in from the top if you want to. Okay. There we are. And then we just keep going. Now, you can place them on a tray like that, so that there's about 1 centimetre in between. Okay, and then when they rise a little bit more, they should touch. You could arrange them like that, or you could actually arrange them differently, so that you've got a Christmas tree type effect. It's up to you. So that you have that sort of effect, and you end up with your Christmas tree. Okay, so it's completely up to you. You should get about 8 or 9 pieces. Ideally 9 would fit nicely together. I've actually got 8 at the moment. So I'm going to just arrange them so that they can sort of touch together and join, but they're not completely touching at the moment. Okay, and then I'm going to have 2 like so. Right, so they should be fairly even in height if you've measured correctly. This one was an end piece, so it's not quite the same height, but we're pretty much there. Okay. This is the point at which you've got them on the baking tray. If you notice, I've cut them and I've turned them over onto their side so that they're cut side up, and then I've loosely covered them with a little bit of cling film, because we want to allow them to rise a little bit so that they end up touching together a little bit better than they are. So you want them about 1 centimetre apart. Okay, now these have been continuing to rise while I handle them. So 1 centimetre apart, just so that they can then touch when they grow a little bit more. Okay, so I'm just going to put that to rise for about 10 minutes. 20 if you had them. If I was doing this at home, I would actually then, you know, I had plenty of time, I would actually leave them for about 20 minutes. But 10 minutes is enough just to give them a chance to rise a little bit more and to touch each other. Okay, so that's actually going to go to one side into a warm place. Whilst that's happening, I'm going to prepare my topping, or sort my ingredients out, wash up. So you wash up as you go, because it's important to keep your work area clean, and wash up at stages. And I'll come back to you when these are risen and ready to go. Okay, they've had 10 minutes to have for further rising. 10-15 minutes if you've got it. If you've got longer available to you, take longer, so I'd say up to about 20 minutes or so. So you can see that they're nicely puffed up. They have started to touch as well, so they are pretty much touching. Okay, ideally you're looking for even size, so same thickness. Okay, I always do things so that I can actually do a comparison. That would stand out as an odd one out, so that's too small. Okay, that they're more consistent in size, in terms of depth, and also in terms of size overall. So you're looking for consistency really if you're making a batch of anything. Okay, so these will then go in the oven. So they go in the oven for 20, where are we? So it is 20 to 25 minutes on gas mark 5, which is 190 degrees if you've got a fan oven. Okay, so I'm going to put those in the oven. So you can see, so they're just going to go into the oven. Use your oven gloves, remembering to protect your wrists. Okay, pop those into the oven and gently close the door. So after 15 minutes you want to check them, so I'm going to set the timer for 15 minutes. Okay, I've just taken these out of the oven. They've been in there for 13 minutes. I'd say they're a little bit too brown, so ideally after 10 now I'm going to suggest that you take them out and put a piece of foil over the top. Just hook it round a little bit, but be careful not to burn your hands on the tray, just to protect your Chelsea buns from burning. Okay, they need to go into the oven for another 10 minutes, or 5 to 10 minutes. So I'm going to put them in for 5. Okay, I've taken these out of the oven. They're cooked. I would say they need to be more that colour than that colour. Okay, so 10 minutes, then put the foil on. I know the recipe says 15. After 15 minutes, put foil on to stop them from browning. It went over by 3 minutes. I left them for 13 minutes, and that's why these are browner. So I would say adjust that to 10 minutes, then foil, then cook them for another 5 to 10 minutes. So basically you're cooking them overall for 20 to 25 minutes in total, but making sure that you protect them from going too brown with some foil. When they're done, you melt some apricot jam and you brush that on as a glaze. Okay. I wouldn't brush this on when they're in the oven because the jam will burn. Okay. And a jam without bits in would be better. Mine's got little bits of fruit in it, but that was the only apricot jam that I had. So we will just continue anyway. If you want it slightly runnier, you could actually add a little bit of water, like a half a teaspoon or a teaspoon of water to that, and then that would actually make it easier to brush on if you've got a really thick jam like I have. So you brush on the melted jam. That was just melted in the microwave for about 20-30 seconds in a glass or heat-proof dish. It's much safer, much quicker, much easier to melt it in the microwave than it would be to melt it in a saucepan, because then the chances are you'll actually burn the jam. Okay, So that just gives it a really nice glaze. Okay. Just about squeezed. That was a heaped tablespoon of apricot jam, but the jam that I bought is pretty thick and it has large bits in it, so not the best for brushing on like this, but we're getting there. Okay, so that gives that a really nice glazed finish around the outside as well. That would have been better if it had been put together with the, if you put them on the tray with all the joins inside, then you won't get this happening. But again, I do things like this to show you what happens if you don't do it right, so that then you can see the pitfalls. Okay, so that would be better if it was turned around with the join on the inside. Okay, so we just leave that to cool for a moment. And the next stage is to mix your orange rind. So you've got a little bit of orange rind. Okay, so mix that in. I've sieved the icing sugar. Okay, and I'm putting to that, I'm adding 2 tablespoons of water. It says 2 tablespoons of water, so we just go with that. It is a lot of icing sugar, and it might not seem like there's a lot of liquid there, but you'll be amazed at how little water you need to actually mix icing sugar into a liquid. Okay. It might need a little dribble more, but not much. Okay, so we want to end up with a sort of runny, but not really runny. Let's just get this out of the way. A slightly pourable icing that you can drizzle across the top. So be very, very careful not to add too much liquid, because you can ruin your icing sugar then, and you'd have to start all over again, or keep adding more icing sugar. So it really doesn't take a huge amount. I say that this isn't a true tablespoon, so it is 2 tablespoons. I'm just adding it very cautiously. Okay, just add a tiny dribble more. Okay, so added a little bit more water, but you really don't want it getting any runnier than that. Okay, so it's just sort of pouring off the back of the spoon. Remembering to sieve your icing sugar first, then all you're doing. Now the recipe tells you to transfer it onto a cooling tray, but it's fine on here. I've kept the paper underneath to catch all the bits. Otherwise you transfer it onto a cooling tray with the paper underneath, so that basically it's going to catch all of the icing that runs down, but that's what you're doing with it. It's rather a lot of icing for a small effect. I don't like too sweet. Being diabetic, this is far from the best thing, but basically a little drizzle of icing is fine. Okay. And you can see that it's got that nice little touch of rind in there as well, the sort of zest of the orange. Okay. So it's pouring on. You don't need to completely cover it, because otherwise it'd be swimming in icing. Okay, you don't really want it swimming in icing, you just want a nice covering, sort of like a little trickle of it really. You could do your icing a tiny bit thicker than this if you wanted to stay as an obvious trail, because otherwise it's just sort of pouring through. But because I'm not really very keen on icing, I am keeping it fairly runny, so it gives a thin covering rather than a thick layer of it. Okay, so that's there, it's pretty much done and ready to tear and share. Right, and as I say, if you wanted it for Christmas, it's great to actually do it as a Christmas tree shape. But they're your completed Chelsea buns. So at this point then, you can cut them up, separate them out, and get ready to share and enjoy with your family. Thank you. Enjoy. Okay, so added a little bit more water, but you really don't want it getting any runnier than that. Okay, so it's just sort of pouring off the back of the spoon. Remembering to sieve your icing sugar first, then all you're doing. Now the recipe tells you to transfer it onto a cooling tray, but it's fine on here. I've kept the paper underneath to catch all the bits. Otherwise, you transfer it onto a cooling tray with the paper underneath, so that basically it's going to catch all of the icing that runs down, but that's what you're doing with it. It's rather a lot of icing for a small effect. I don't like too sweet. Being diabetic, this is far from the best thing, but basically a little drizzle of icing is fine. Okay, and you can see that it's got that nice little touch of rind in there as well, the sort of zest of the orange. Okay, so it's pouring on. You don't need to completely cover it, because otherwise it'd be swimming in icing. Okay, you don't really want it swimming in icing, you just want a nice covering, sort of like a little trickle of it really. You could do your icing a tiny bit thicker than this if you want it to stay as an obvious trail, because otherwise it's just sort of pouring through. But because I'm not really very keen on icing, I'm keeping it fairly runny, so it gives a thin covering rather than a thick layer of it. Okay, so that's there, it's pretty much done and ready to tear and share. Right, and as I say, if you wanted it for Christmas, it's great to actually do it as a Christmas tree shape. But they're your completed Chelsea buns. So at this point then, you can cut them up, separate them out, and get ready to share and enjoy with your family. Thank you.